The judge's voice thundered through the courtroom, accusing a man limping from sacrifice of faking pain to manipulate justice. The room froze. Shock, disbelief, rage simmered beneath the surface. Then, with a sudden crash, the courtroom doors burst open. But what happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. Judge Franklin Hayes sat behind the imposing bench, his sharp gaze fixed on Dr. Ethan Miller as the man carefully stepped forward, each footfall betraying the slow, deliberate effort it took to steady his injured leg. The courtroom air was heavy, not just with the sterile scent of polished wood and aged paper, but with an undercurrent of restrained disbelief. Hayes had always been known for his no-nonsense demeanor, his intolerance for frivolity or weakness. Yet even his most cynical observers weren't prepared for the blistering accusation he launched the moment Ethan appeared, visibly marked by pain. The judge's voice cracked through the silence, brittle and unforgiving. "Why are you limping, doctor? Are you trying to distract the court? Or perhaps exaggerate your suffering to gain sympathy?" The words landed like a hammer blow, deafening in their coldness. It was as if the man who had devoted decades to wielding justice had suddenly turned it into an instrument of cruelty. Ethan's jaw clenched, a flicker of exhaustion flashing behind his steady blue eyes. His limp was no theatrical ploy. It was the raw consequence of a reckless act of compassion. Just months ago, when the call came about a trapped dog in a burning warehouse on the outskirts of town, Ethan hadn't hesitated. Risking his own safety, he had pulled the frightened animal from the flames, sustaining an injury that had since forced him into grueling physical therapy. Every step now was a testament to that sacrifice, painful, stubborn, and real. Yet none of this mattered to Hayes. For the judge, a man who saw the courtroom as a bastion of order above all else, vulnerability was synonymous with weakness, and weakness was a liability. The courtroom, to Hayes, was a theater of control where authority must never be questioned or compromised. Ethan's limp was a chink in that armor, an uncomfortable reminder of imperfection that threatened to unravel the judge's iron grip. In the rows of seats behind Ethan, murmurs grew louder, sympathy simmering just beneath the surface of professional detachment. The people who knew Ethan, pet owners, neighbors, even some opposing lawyers, felt a surge of indignation. Here was a man who had saved lives, who had earned a reputation for kindness and tenacity, now being publicly humiliated by the very figure meant to uphold fairness. Ethan's motivation pulsed beneath his calm exterior. He wasn't in that courtroom to garner pity. He was fighting for justice on behalf of a client falsely accused of animal neglect. His limp was a scar from his past battle, not a plea for compassion. Each wince with every step echoed the determination to stand tall, not despite his injury, but because of it. The judge's tirade was not just a personal affront. It was a challenge to the integrity of the cause Ethan represented. Hayes's strictness was born from a place of pride, a conviction that his courtroom was a place for unyielding truth and discipline. But it was also a shield for his insecurities. His impatience with Ethan's limp betrayed an anxiety about losing control, about confronting the messy, human elements that seep into legal proceedings. Compassion, pain, imperfection, these were variables Hayes wished to excise, but the world outside his bench was messy, unpredictable, and raw. The tension was palpable, an invisible current surging through the room. It wasn't just about a limp anymore. It was about respect, about dignity, about the limits of authority when confronted by human frailty. The judge's harsh words had inadvertently ignited a spark of outrage, a collective reckoning with how society honors or fails to honor those who sacrifice for others. Ethan stood firm, a symbol of quiet resilience, while the courtroom braced for the storm that was about to break. The heavy oak doors of courtroom 3B exploded inward with a force that startled everyone present, cutting through the thick, suffocating tension like a sudden gust of wind. General Robert Sinclair, a towering figure whose very presence commanded respect, stepped inside with deliberate strides that echoed resolutely against the polished floor. His uniform, impeccably maintained despite the passage of time, bore medals that gleamed dully under the harsh courtroom lights, silent testimony to battles fought far beyond these walls. The limp in his gait was unmistakable, a subtle but unmistakable echo of the wounds etched into his body and soul, a mirror to the injury that marked Ethan Miller's every step. The room shifted imperceptibly as all heads pivoted toward the general, a collective inhalation of surprise and unspoken recognition rippling through the spectators, attorneys, and even the stoic court staff. Sinclair's reputation as a war hero was woven into the fabric of the community. His words held a gravity forged in the crucible of sacrifice and endurance. Without hesitation, he made his way toward the bench, his steady eyes locking with Judge Hayes, who now sat visibly unsettled, the rigid control he prized suddenly trembling under the unexpected challenge. "Your Honor," Sinclair's voice rang clear, deliberate, resonant, "I believe you owe Dr. Miller an apology." There was no anger in his tone, only a solemn command layered with the quiet power of lived experience. The statement hung in the air, a verdict not of law, but of moral reckoning, and it carried an implicit understanding. Sinclair knew the cost of bravery, the relentless pain behind visible scars, and he recognized the injustice in questioning a man's integrity based on a wound that was as real as the flames Ethan had faced. Hayes's jaw tightened, a flicker of irritation darkening his eyes, but the general's presence was an unyielding force. The courtroom, previously taut with hostility and disbelief, seemed to exhale collectively, as if Sinclair's arrival dissolved some of the oppressive weight. The judge's habitual defenses faltered, revealing beneath the polished veneer a man grappling with his own concealed fears. The fear that control might slip through his grasp, that authority alone was not enough to command respect without understanding. Sinclair pressed on, unwavering. "Judge, you question this man's integrity because of a limp? You forget the sacrifices made in this community, sacrifices that sometimes leave lasting marks." His words cut deeper than any rebuke Hayes had issued moments before. They exposed a fundamental truth, that honor and sacrifice are often etched into the body, visible or not, and that denying their weight is an act of profound injustice. Ethan met Sinclair's gaze briefly, the gratitude there unspoken but unmistakable. For the first time that morning, hope flickered like fragile flame within him, hope that justice might still prevail in this courtroom, that his sacrifice would not be dismissed or demeaned by callous suspicion. The courtroom's atmosphere shifted subtly, the brittle tension softening into a tentative solidarity, as if Sinclair's intervention had sparked a fragile bridge between the rigid order of law and the messy reality of human pain. Judge Hayes, though visibly rattled, was not yet defeated. His retort came, laced with veiled resentment and a brittle defensiveness that betrayed more about his inner turmoil than about Ethan or Sinclair. His sharp words were less a defense of the courtroom's integrity and more a shield against his own vulnerabilities, a desperate attempt to reclaim the authority that the general's presence had so starkly challenged. In that charged moment, the courtroom became a crucible, not just for legal judgment, but for the deeper conflict between rigid authority and the nuanced truths of sacrifice, pain, and empathy. The battle lines were drawn, and the outcome hinged on more than law. It depended on the willingness to confront uncomfortable human realities hidden beneath the formalities of justice. The moment the court reconvened, the air inside courtroom 3B was charged with a palpable intensity that seemed to ripple through every person present. General Sinclair's sudden intervention had fractured the veneer of control Judge Hayes once wielded so confidently, leaving a subtle tremor beneath the courtroom's formal structure. The judge sat with a rigid posture, but the weight of Sinclair's words lingered visibly in his expression. Tightened lips, a flicker of doubt behind his cold eyes. This was no longer just a trial about an accusation. It was a reckoning with deeply ingrained prejudices, a confrontation with the very essence of justice itself. Ethan Miller rose to deliver his closing argument with a demeanor that combined humility and unwavering resolve. Each word was measured, deliberate, a reflection of months spent healing wounds, both physical and emotional. He did not plead for sympathy, nor did he attempt to diminish the gravity of his injury. Instead, he framed his limp not as a weakness, but as an indelible mark of sacrifice. "I stand before you today," Ethan's voice rang steady, "not as a victim, but as someone who has borne pain in the service of others, animals, clients, this community. My limp is proof of that commitment." His eyes swept across the jury, capturing their attention with the raw sincerity of his testimony. There was no pretense here, only a man stripped down to the core of his convictions. The jury sat enraptured, the courtroom's usual chatter replaced by an almost reverent silence. The presence of General Sinclair seemed to have primed the room, opening hearts and minds to truths that often lie buried beneath rigid authority. Ethan's story was not merely about the specifics of the case, it was a narrative of resilience, a testament to the endurance required to stand tall despite adversity. The limp was no longer a distraction, it had become a symbol of courage, etched into flesh and spirit. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the room seemed to hold its breath, the tension thick and suffocating. Minutes stretched into what felt like an eternity until the foreperson returned, the weight of the verdict in their steady hands. "We, the jury, find the defendant not guilty of all charges," the voice declared, firm and resolute. A collective exhale swept through the courtroom, but the surprise was far from over. The judge's reprimand was read aloud next, an official, public acknowledgement of his misconduct during the proceedings. Hayes, once the embodiment of unquestioned authority, was now the subject of censure. The courtroom erupted into a tumult of whispers, shocked glances, and a swelling sense of vindication. The collapse of the judge's ironclad facade was a seismic shift in the courtroom's power dynamics, an affirmation that justice transcended rank and rigid control. Ethan felt a complex surge of relief and vindication wash through him, grounding his fatigue with a renewed sense of purpose. The day had tested him beyond the courtroom walls, challenging the prejudice cloaked as authority and demanding a reckoning with integrity. His limp, once perceived as a vulnerability, was now a badge of honor, a testament to battles fought in silence and won with quiet strength. General Sinclair approached with steady steps, placing a firm, reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You showed more courage today than many on a battlefield," he said, his voice low but filled with genuine respect. The simple gesture spoke volumes, validation from a man who understood the true cost of sacrifice. Ethan met the general's gaze, a faint but genuine smile touching his lips. The courtroom's heavy atmosphere had lifted, replaced by a tangible hope that rippled beyond these walls. News of the trial spread swiftly, a powerful reminder that true strength often resides in vulnerability, and that justice is not wielded through power, but through fairness and respect. The verdict was more than a legal triumph. It was a beacon for those who, like Ethan, bear scars unseen, yet no less real, a call to recognize the humanity behind every story of struggle.